They can be a great people, Kal-El. They wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way. For this reason above all, their capacity for good, I have sent them you, my only son. I'm Liam, this is Rob, and welcome to the Hey Guys podcast. This week, we take our first look back at 70s cinema as we revisit what I incorrectly thought was the first ever superhero movie, Richard Donner's Superman the movie. Considered for the longest time to be the high watermark by which all other superhero movies would be judged, has time finally caught up with the cinematic classic, or does it remain one of the finest examples of the genre? Now, I would argue, Rob, that it's a little bit of both, dare I say. A movie of incredible highs and somewhat laughable lows at times. But
yes. It's very funny, isn't it? Because the good things in it are fantastic. Mm-hmm. Aside from the end, most of the flying sequences look great. They still look spot on because he's flying at night. But as soon as he starts flying in the day, it gets a bit iffy.
Yeah.
We'll get into this film is 70s as fuck in a second. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's just so the things that look great. And then you've got the things that, because they're introducing Superman and his greatest foe is Lex Luthor, is just a human. All of a sudden, his power set becomes a little bit unmatched. Like Superman is just, the first time you see Superman, which actually is an hour into the film, I noticed.
Yeah, it's over an hour. It's the only film I could think of was like, I remember all the grief Ang Lee's Hulk got. Now that's a film I actually think is better than a lot of people would suggest. Again, a movie of highs and lows. But that movie, all the fuss and the build-up was like, you don't get to see the Hulk for an hour.
Yeah.
In this film, no pun intended, it totally flies under the radar that you go well beyond an hour until you actually see Superman, which I like looking back, I would have been like, oh, it probably takes like 30 minutes. No, well over halfway through this film.
And that's what I wanted to say. You don't see him for an hour, and then he does some, I guess, Superman saves, but it's a bit weird. Like, he saves Lois Lane from crashing. Okay, that's not weird. But then he saves that, he arrests that cat burglar. Mm-hmm. He arrests those guys on the boat, and then that's pretty much it for the rest of it. And then he drowns in a pool for a bit and then flies out and stops a rocket and then reverses time.
Well, yeah, his powers are a bit all over the place, but I think one of the reasons for that is that they have to squeeze so much ostensibly into the last 30 minutes. Like if you take,
Gene Hackman, agree, so maybe they shouldn't have spent an hour to introduce Superman.
Yeah, but I feel like it benefits from that. I mean, to be honest, this film could actually arguably do with being maybe another 20 minutes longer.
See, I don't know. I think. Oh, then again, I'm thinking back in my 2023 head now in 1978. You don't really need in my opinion, a origin story of Superman. Everyone knows.
I think you do in 1978.
Okay, I get that, but I don't know if you need that long. Like it's an hour, to be fair. And
it brings all the charm to the film.
Even though the origin is an hour, it still goes at pelt. Because after you have Krypton, which I'm sorry, there should be more planet accidents on that place. You're not going to fall over though, pulling your eye out on one of the crystals.
More planet accidents. 0 days since the last planet accident.
Yeah, I mean, everything is sharp. You've got to be fucking so careful.
It is.
So, after that, then he lands in Smallville, and to be fair, mate, I wasn't expecting to see Clark Kent's 3-year-old penis, but I saw it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's fine. Like, what he would be nude. I think that's fair enough.
It was, but I didn't think that was allowed on screen, but apparently it is. So
it's a ridiculous thing. I know what you mean. Like nowadays, they probably would be. You can't have that, but it's like, why not? It's like it's a naked kid. It's like all those people who, like in America, who complain about Renaissance art as being pornographic because you can see, cherubs with penises and stuff. It's like, if you think there's anything sexual about that, you've got something wrong with your fucking head.
Like, I'm
not saying you do.
I wasn't expecting to see that.
I know what you mean.
And then all of a sudden he's 18. All of a sudden his dad dies. All of a sudden then it's 12 years later and he's Superman. So even though it took an hour, it like the whole thing just progressed so quickly. It didn't stop in one time frame. Really.
Well, there's just so much to tell.
And I tell you one thing it did do was, oh my God, it set up a sequel before the film even started. I don't know if we mentioned this last week on or off pod, But
we did briefly, yeah. But I think, well, just what a ballsy move it is. The fact that nowadays films get criticized for, setting up a sequel in like the closing credits, the end credit sequence. This film had the guts to set up the sequel in the opening sequence of the movie. It's unbelievable. Like I had totally forgotten about the whole, General Zod thing and him being sent to the Phantom Zone. But all that is basically, obviously, it adds a bit of weight and a bit of world building. But really, what it's doing is setting you up for Superman 2, which is.
But I wonder, is it because I didn't, I haven't seen this in facts, maybe it's there somewhere. Were these filmed back to back? Because what I read, there you go. That's probably why it set up the sequel.
I didn't know that though until.
No, I only read because I read Richard Donner was, after 19 months of filming Superman 1 and partway through Superman 2, he was then let go. So that's what made me question if it was filmed back to back. So obviously that's why it sets up the sequel, because they knew it was coming no matter what. Mm-hmm. So
it shows a huge amount of confidence and so far ahead of its time. I can't think of any other film, because when I think of like films being filmed back to back, I think of like Back to the Future 2 and 3, for instance.
Yeah.
But of course, they usually come off, the original was a hit, and then you have the confidence to be like, well, we can go for 2 and 3 back to back here. The fact that they've gone straight out the gate and been like so confident that, we're just going to film both films, it's going to be that good. But I think there was that confidence there, that they had the right guy, they had Donner, there was so much talent involved with Brando, Gene Hackman. It was just like, how can this fail? But you also look back at this was, I know I mentioned in the intro that this wasn't technically the first superhero film, but if really what you're looking back is like back at like 20s and 30s cinemas with like Zorro and Flash Gordon and stuff like this. This had realistically been the first big budget, quote unquote, modern superhero blockbuster.
Yeah.
And the confidence to go in with like 2 back to back is,
You mentioned Back to the Future, right? How did we not do in our Back to the Future episode? How did we not say that Marty McFly's older brother is Jimmy Olsen? I didn't even click that until now.
Yeah, I didn't click that until you literally just said it.
Yeah.
Maybe because I spent the whole part of... there's a lot I like about this film. I'm not a massive fan of Jimmy Olsen or Otis in particular. They feel like kind of throwbacks. And
do you know what I love about Otis?
Because... What's that?
His theme tune. Every time Otis is on screen walking, you've got that dum 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 dum.
This film has an amazing score. I'm not convinced, but I'm not going to blame the score for it, because they're obviously going both for a bit of levity and a bit kind of comedy sidekicks, but also they feel like additional throwbacks, because you've got to remember this wasn't just a movie in 1978. This was supposed to be totally cutting edge. The whole idea, you'll believe a man can fly. And we can laugh at some of the special effects now, and we will, because some of it has aged poorly.
Yeah.
But back then, it was such a big deal. But as the intro showed, the prelude before the opening credits, they're trying to tell you, it's like, well, this is the start of a new world of cinema, basically. And those two felt like throwbacks to kind of the 30s and 40s, back to the old serials and back to the cartoons. But of course, we're looking back to 1978, and that film in 1978 is looking back to characters from the 30s. So those two, they feel a little bit out of place in this film. But as I said, you get it right from the start of this film, how it's trying to show you that this is the future of cinema. And I think, despite this movie's faults, the opening 10 minutes of this movie, I would put up against literally anything. I forgot how much I love the prelude, where you have, it's like set in like an old-fashioned cinema.
So
sorry, Karen.
I've seen this film a few times, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned to you off pod, and I'll mention it now. I've never seen that opening prelude. It's like, I don't know whether, because every time I've seen this film, it's been on terrestrial TV, and maybe they didn't put it on terrestrial TV. Mm-hmm. I never saw that opening prelude. So I was just like, what the fuck is this? Am I watching the right film? Like, I didn't know what was going on. Honestly, when that was on, I didn't know what was going on. And I thought I was being ripped off because I had to rent this film, by the way. Rent it.
Well, I actually had to buy it again, because I was watching it on DVD, and I've had the DVD for like 20 years. Took it out of storage, put it in, watched half the film, and then it broke. And I couldn't bring myself to rent it. So I bought the whole Blu-ray box set, because the one film broke, and I was like, that's it, I'm buying 5 movies.
So I love how you couldn't spend the £2.49 to rent it, so you bought the Blu-ray.
Well, it was £3.50 to rent it and see it once, or it was £15 to buy Superman 1, 2, 3, 4 and Superman Returns. Now, Superman 3 and 4 are terrible, but 1 and 2 obviously are good, and I've got a soft spot for Superman Returns. So I'm just like, well, we're talking like £11.50 in difference.
Yeah, but I get that. Set. But are you really going to watch this again within...
Well, that's the thing, though. I've kept my my physical media. It's all in a cupboard kind of thing, but it's well presented. And the important thing is it's easily accessed. It's not, I know I use the term storage, that's incorrect. It's literally in a door behind my TV. And the reason is, I know you're into buying digitally. I just can't deal with the idea of buying
I'm into physical
movies
as well. You've seen my collection.
Oh, yeah, you've got that as well. Well, the problem is, I think everybody immediately, well, certainly a few years ago, thought, oh, well, Netflix and all these subscription things are going to basically be the death knell of DVD and Blu-ray. But they're so unreliable, and movies come on, they come off and stuff. Yeah. And I think that's the reason now where you'll notice that DVDs and Blu-rays are actually a tiny bit more expensive than they were a few years ago. And I think the reason is people just want to have the option. So even though I might not watch Superman for another 10, 15 years, I don't think it's not like when we were younger, when it's like, oh, you keep in VHS and then 20 years later, it's just a dormant kind of technology. It's like, I think my Blu-ray will probably still be relevant as long as I've got a player. I don't think there's going to be anything much better than it. So
and to be
I
fair,
prefer to just have it ready for when I want to watch it.
DVDs and Blu-rays now, they're hard to find physical media in the high street. Unless you go to like HMV. My local Asda used to have a massive section. Now it's down to like one shelf. And the same with, I think my local Tesco and Sainsbury's don't even have DVDs anymore.
It's a very poor selection.
It's weird that, like, it was not weird. It's just the sign of the times.
But that's why I think they actually cost a bit more.
Sorry?
Like if you go to Amazon and stuff now, and I think that's one of the reasons is like there isn't the competition there anymore. So Amazon can put down whatever prices they want. So if you want to just go and buy a DVD or a Blu-ray, it's not like, it felt like 5-6 years ago, you could go to a lot of places. And because, like you said, they sold them all over the place and it felt like a dying technology, you could buy them for like £1 or £2. Now it's like most of these films are at least £5, So I think there's just, and we've got the same with music. The excitement and the accessibility of digital technology has kind of worn off a little bit. And I think people are looking to go back to the ownership aspect of physical media. But sorry, we've kind of gone off the rails bit here. To bring it back to that intro, it actually reminded me a little bit of, I'm not sure if you've seen Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, but it has a similar opening where it's got this sepia tone. Of course, we're going back and watching a film which is more than 50 years old. So we think of that as being old, but it's showing you this clip of old Westerns, and it's almost tricking people at the time into, oh, this is what the film's going to look like. And then it goes modern and in color. And obviously Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was, despite being a Western, a very modern film in 1969. And it was the same with this. You get the curtains, you get the weird box form, like 16:9 format, whatever it's called. And then all of a sudden it goes from black and white, the camera pans out, you get the widescreen, and you get those amazing credits, which still to this day look absolutely phenomenal. And alongside that, you get one of the best main themes of all time, the one which I think for most people is synonymous with Superman. Almost it doesn't matter if it's this Superman, a cartoon Superman. When people think of Superman, they think of that John Williams main theme. But not only in the first 10 minutes, you get one of the greatest tracks of all time, you get two. Because I actually think when they cut then to the planet Krypton and the track The Planet Krypton comes on, I think that track's even better. So it's like in the first 10 minutes, I was like, well, you've got two of the best musical scores I've ever heard, not the whole score, sorry, two musical numbers I've ever heard in a movie. And at that point, at least, the film still looks fantastic. Those wide shots of Krypton look fantastic. And then, of course, you get Marlon Brando. I know he was paid $4 million for 10 minutes work, but Jesus Christ, was he worth it? Because he brings so much gravitas to the role.
Yeah, he does really well, Brando, to be fair, within Krypton. I still think Krypton is a weird place to live. Like, and they're saying thousands of years ahead. I wanted to take it away from, because I know you love talking about, like, it's the cinema and it does this and it does that. Mm-hmm. I wanted to take it down to the actors a second, randomly. Did you notice the who the copper with the who there was two coppers following Otis, right? Mm-hmm. And the one with the radio, the one that doesn't get pushed in front of the train. Did you notice who that was?
The one who doesn't die horribly. Yeah. No, I didn't. No.
So bear with me because we're going to go down a tangent, right? Mm-hmm. Again. So that's Steve. I think his name is Steve Kahan. That's Lethal Weapon captain, right?
Oh,
we already mentioned him 2 weeks ago in Demolition Man. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, he's popped up, like he's popped up in Lethal Weapon. So he is actually Richard Donner's brother-in-law.
Okay.
right? So he's retired now. And I'm just looking at his films, right? I was looking at his films before we started. And 90% of his, well, he's only done a few films. He's only in like 42 credits, which I say only. But most of them are all Donna films. Like Donna's for like the captain of this. He was in, and well, as I go for this list, these are films I never knew fucking Donna directed. Mm-hmm. So Steve Cahane was in like 16 Blocks, directed by Donna. Timeline, directed by Donna. Conspiracy Theory, directed by Donna. Assassins, directed by Richard Donner. Maverick, directed by Richard Donner.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. He's one of those weird directors. Because I think most people, when they think of Richard Donner, you kind of immediately go to Superman. You might go to The Omen and stuff like that.
The one that totally blew my mind, Radio fucking Flyer. Did
he direct that as well?
Yeah, that random Elijah Wood, Tom Hanks film about
Christ. I mean, he's got quite the CV. Yeah, he's famous for like 2 or 3 movies, but then the others, it's not like they're all terrible. It just seems to be lost to the sands of time. Other than obviously you bring it up now, but yeah, his CV is probably a lot longer than you imagine.
Oh, it's insane. But it was funny because, like I said, so when Richard Donner stopped directing in 2006. Mm-hmm. Steve Cahane stopped acting.
Of course. Well, you get this every so often, don't you?
After that.
They've just got like their buddy, like almost like a good luck guy, like with Pixar. Actually, the guy from Pixar and Cheers, he's in this, isn't he? I forget his name.
Not Norm, the other guy.
Yeah, Norm's friend. He's the guy at the control station. He's wearing like a white cap, like a dodgy white cap at the end of the film. He's at like Missile Command. I'm sure it was him. I didn't double check it, but it looks so much like him. And age-wise, it kind of all added up. I assume it's him. But I just wanted to go very briefly back to the score. I was going to make the argument that Superman now is actually home to, I don't want to say the 2 best, but 2 of the best superhero scores of all time. Because I actually think Man of Steel by Hans Zimmer is an unbelievable score. Like in terms of like taking on one of the most iconic scores and then creating something completely new, and not only doing that, but creating something absolutely awesome in its own right, and one that suits that movie, because they're very different movies in so many respects. But as much as like Marvel might have the upper hand in terms of cinematic success in recent years, and that doesn't include Batman, I suppose, in terms of scores, DC is so far ahead. Like when I think of superhero scores, I immediately think of this. I think of Man of Steel. I think of the Dark Knight trilogy, and then I think of Danny Elfman's work on Batman with Tim Burton.
I'm with you with this and Batman. For the life of me, I couldn't tell you Man of Steel or Dark Knight.
I mean, I know you're not as big a fan. The Man of Steel soundtrack is.
No. I've never once said I'm not a huge fan of that film.
No, I know. Sorry,
I couldn't tell you the score.
I think it's an absolutely fantastic score. But the point being is that with Marvel scores, I was saying, like, other than I can probably hum the Avengers theme tune, but I was like, why can't I hum any other Marvel tracks? Literally any.
No, I can't think of any of these scores, because the one thing that John Williams did well, the only thing I can think of is Superman score at the moment from this film.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jesus Christ, yeah. I think if you ask people to like hum 3 scores, they might just hum 3 Williams scores. They're that memorable. Yeah. But when I in the end, I was like, there has to be a reason why I can't think of any Marvel scores. And I looked into it, and there are articles on it. And supposedly it's down to it's a modern trend, but the use of temp tracks. And this isn't exclusive to Marvel films, but like I said, it's become much more prevalent due to digital editing.
Yeah.
So basically, when a director is shooting a film, they use temp tracks, and basically they're just taking a track from another movie and they're using that over their own what they're shooting to kind of get a feel for how it's going to look on screen. And basically, then they get so in love with the temp track that they get the composer in to just recreate as close as they can without kind of, infringing on copyrights. And I saw a few examples, and it's unbelievable. Like, you see what they were working with a temp track, and then they've got a different composer in, and he basically just recreates what they've heard in another film. And it's within Marvel, obviously it ends up being the snake that eats its own tail, because they're taking the scores from other Marvel films for temp tracks, then they're working over it, but they're staying so similar. So that's why every fucking Marvel soundtrack basically sounds exactly the same, and why they're not particularly memorable, because it's shot for the movie rather than being something individual, if that makes sense. No, I just thought that was really interesting.
I couldn't point the scores off of Marvel ones. You're right. I couldn't even think of the Avengers. I want to go back a couple of things. First of all, you're right. It was John Ratzenberger.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Yeah,
you were
I thought it was
spot
him.
on.
Yeah, he still had the moustache.
Yeah.
And he still has that slightly confused look that he does so well in all of his movies.
Also, the major was Larry Hagman, who was JR, wasn't he?
Oh, shit, yeah, of course. They all, oh, dude, this film is so sad. Like you said at the top, this film is 70s as fuck.
And yeah, so that's the other thing I want to
go for it, bud.
Can I go into what, like, I got two for why this film, and I know you'll have more, but why this is 70s as fuck. The first one, my note says, man, the 70s was rough. The little girl told her mum about Superman and her cat, and all you just hear was the slap.
Dude, I had the exact same note. I was like, that scene should have been the sweetest. And it's the difference between, say, Superman in this film and, say, Superman in Man of Steel. And one of the things a lot of people complain about is you don't get those sweeter, more kind of innocent moments. And you have this lovely scene where the girl's cat is stuck up in a tree and, you know, he's saving the world, but he takes the time to take the cat out of the tree and it's completely undermined by immediate domestic violence. It's unbelievable.
Because you don't see it. She just goes in, Mum, a man just took the cat out of the tree.
Stop She's like, lying. Shut the fuck up, you stupid bitch.
Yeah, I told you to stop lying, and then you hear the thwack. And then...
Yeah, sorry, mine wasn't verbatim. I do apologize.
And then you get the other one then is after Miss Tessmacher, after she passes out in the car and all and they go,
soldiers.
What should we do, sir? Well, I say we do a vigorous chest massage
and mouth to mouth, and then he gets all the men to hide it. I mean, that is like full-on sexual abuse.
And that was dumb. Larry Hagman. Larry Hagman's like, easy, soldier, I'll do it. I wouldn't let you do anything that I wouldn't do myself.
Yes, it's very much a moment of its time, but it is played for laughs. But, you know, this is like 70s, 80s. You know, you look at the comedies of the time, they were so sex-obsessed.
Yeah.
All of those things. Although the one person who should be sex-obsessed is actually Superman, but we'll get to that in a moment. But one of the things... As great as many aspects of this film are, and it's hard not to, you know, when your movie includes Brando, Gene Hackman, it's got this amazing Williams score, it's got this amazing chemistry between Reeves and Kidder. The good stuff, as we said, is fantastic. But one of the biggest issues are the visuals. As you say, sometimes the flying stuff looks okay.
Yeah.
Like the white shots often look fantastic still, but then the suits and the Barnett suddenly feel very 70s. Then you get to the running sequence alongside the train.
I wrote that down, right? I wrote, as bad as that running effect is, and it's bad, it's still better than Ezra Miller's in The Flash. Like, it still looks better than Ezra Miller running in The Flash. But my God, it looks like they've got him on a jig, haven't they? They've got him holding a jig, and he's got to run. But his legs have gone further away than it should be while he's running, and it looks like he's running sitting down. It does. It just does. The interesting thing, and it was a genuine concern going into this movie because I hadn't seen it for a long time. But you got to remember, this isn't one of those films that came out when we were younger. This film had already been out for years before we were born. So I remember watching this when I was a kid, and it already looked a little bit dodgy at times to my 7-8-year-old eyes in the mid to late 80s. So going back to it now, the running sequence is laughably bad. There's no two ways around it. Like the Hoover Dam set at the end really does look like, I'm not sure if they couldn't pull it off for the lighting, whatever, but it really does just look like a play set almost. But you do get over it. And I think the reason is, it's because it is such an old film and you just kind of accept its kind of visual nuances and kind of foibles, I suppose. In the same way, like I went back and watched like The Red Shoes from 1948, or if you go back and watch The Seven Samurai from 56, or even I watched The Birds not too long ago, and that's from 1963. Yeah. And all of those films have like a very stagey presentation. Obviously, the effects don't hold up. And it is a barrier at first, but if you stick with it, because the quality of the film is so strong, otherwise, you find yourself forgiving its faults. And because the film is so positive in many respects, and a lot of that comes from Reeve's performance, it's hard to stay angry with anything. It's just like, oh, this, and in so many respects, this film feels like a movie from another time, like it is. It feels like a 70s movie. And once you get into that mindset, I found it personally much easier to forgive its visual shortcomings, but it's definitely a barrier, though. It is a barrier. I came across a barrier, right? And I couldn't get over it. When he meets Lois Lane as Superman and he takes her flying.
Oh, that is...
I know he's the strongest, well, not man on Earth. I know he's super strong. He can lift the planet. I know all of this, right?
Yeah.
But she's not strong. So when they're just holding hands together, She shouldn't be able to stay straight. She should still be falling underneath him, and he just holding her up.
Yeah, in terms of physics, it makes zero sense. And that whole sequence, again, it's another a part of this film which I didn't like as a kid, and I don't particularly like now. And I find it very odd. I love the build up. Although the one thing I will say is she's a reporter, yeah. And I know it's the 70s; he probably earned a bit more. But if we're taking Metropolis to be an obvious stand-in for New York, how the fuck did she afford that apartment? She's got a rooftop apartment with her own personal garden in the middle of the city. Like nowadays, you would have to be. I'm not a millionaire. Wouldn't be enough. You'd have to be a billionaire.
But do you know why? Because she's the top reporter who can't seem to spell the word rapist.
Well, she can't spell any words. I mean, it's a joke which they labour on like 6 times in the space of 2 minutes and then never go back to. Yeah. It's like she can't spell lol, 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 and then we just forget about it. But yeah, the whole and one of the weirdest parts of that sequence, and it's, as I said, it's odd because the stuff between Kidder and Superman when they're on the roof is just so magnetic and they've got so much chemistry immediately. But then as soon she says, "Oh, there's a reference to Peter Pan," and they seem to use it as if to, like, he explicitly says, "Oh, well, this is no fairy tale."
Yeah.
And then immediately you go into what I can only describe as a fairy tale scene. Like you said, she shouldn't be able to fly. It doesn't make any sense. The voiceover stuff.
Oh my god! Can you read my mind shit?
Oh,
it's so fucking it's so creepy as well, and it just goes through. It's weird. Yeah, that "can you read my mind" stuff is not good.
It's not. It's not.
You know, the other thing as well with Lois Lane, with Margot Kidder, and I'm not trying to be mean now. All right, is she attractive?
It's a strange one, and I think one of the reasons she actually works is that she looks a bit more grounded, and she's got a bit of bite, and I think it's something that Amy Adams and Kate Bosworth in Superman Returns, for instance, actually lacked. She's not as beautiful a woman as either of those.
No.
But because she does feel more grounded on Earth, I think it works better. And I think it actually grounds, no pun intended, Superman more, that he is in love with a woman who actually looks like she belongs on Earth. Like when you see Amy Adams, and particularly Kate Bosworth, they don't look like real people. They look like movie stars, don't they?
Yeah.
She doesn't, like, she's not an unattractive woman, but at the same time, I know what you mean. She doesn't look like, she hasn't got movie star good looks at all. Put this way, she looks like she smokes.
That's what I mean. The reason why I asked that is because she looks like a product of the 70s, not 70s 100%. Film. She looks like a product of the 70s.
That's a great way of putting it. Great way.
She is absolutely, she looks like she smokes. She can drink you under the table with top shelf whiskey. Like
100%.
Yeah, and
it was like, you know, when you see those pictures of, like, especially with footballers in like the 70s and 80s, and you see underneath that they were like 25 years old, and you're like, motherfucker, you look 48.
Yeah.
She's kind of got that vibe. Like, I don't know, I haven't actually checked how old Margot Kidder is in this film, but she could legitimately be anywhere between 25 and 42 as far as I'm concerned. And I hope you're looking it up now, because I'm really interested to find out how old she was when she
When was this film made? It was
78.
So let's say it was filmed in 77, yeah? Just
77.
She would have been, fucking hell, she was the same age as my old man. So she would have been 29.
29. Yeah, that's fair enough. As I said, anyway, but like I was being facetious when I said anyway between 25 and 42.
But she does look like she's 10 years away from speaking through a voice box.
She is exactly your point. She looks like a woman who's been living a very 70s life. She drinks a lot. She smokes a lot. She doesn't look like a young 29-year-old. She doesn't look haggard or anything like that. She just looks a woman of Earth in the 70s. That's it.
Really, it's strange way of putting it. To put your finger on, like, that question of, and I know it's not all about that, but she's meant to be the leading lady, and it's really hard to put your finger on. Can she be considered the leading lady? Can she be attractive or not? Sometimes you think, even when she was dressed, and that was what she was wearing to go out at night. That looked like she was wearing a nightie, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, she was clearly down to fuck. But then, so was Superman. But you can't blame him, because you've got to think, right? They've kind of made it clear that he probably wasn't having sex in high school. You know, he lives in Kansas with his very, you know, apparently relatively conservative parents. They're not too conservative. You know, they've kept this alien baby. But then, ostensibly, what he does is he goes and he's homeschooled then by his dead dad for 12 years. That's what fucking happens. Yeah. And it's one of the reasons, because I was trying to get in my head, you know, how can you get away with this slightly cheesy Boy Scout version of Superman? And I always put it down to like the time, whether that be the 30s or when he was when the character was created, or the less cynical 70s. But I think it's actually, as I said, down to the homeschooling. Like in Man of Steel, Clark is a man of Earth. Suddenly, he's suddenly thrown into the savior role, but he's been brought up by his, adopted mother. Whereas in this, there are hints at him being that kind of slightly unruly child when he's there with Martha and Martha and John Kent. Sorry. Yeah. When he's upset, he throws the football, he wants to play, he wants to hang out with the guys and stuff. And you see these moments, and obviously John Kent kind of tries to tell him, it's like, you need to do this. But realistically then, all of his rough edges are kind of taken off by 12 years of homeschooling when he goes off with his dad across the universe, who then teaches him to be the superhero. He's not just, I had it in my head that he was this ready-made superhero, that Superman was just Superman because that is who he is. No, he's taught for 12 years to be this superhero, and that's the reason it works.
Is that hologram as well always there? Because obviously it's answering the questions and all that, so I know it's not sentient, but is it always there? Because he's been there for 12 years being homeschooled. Mm-hmm. Like, is he able to turn his dad off and have a cheeky wank? Or is his dad's face just constantly...
I would like to think there would still be barriers, even with your dead father kind of thing. But that is, I mean, having a bit of the old how's your father aside, it's like after 12 years of traveling around the universe with your dead dad, no wonder the first woman he kind of looks at, he basically falls in love with her. Yeah. And that is the difference, again, between Cavill and Reeves. Reeves has got that wry smile. Like, when he shows up on that rooftop terrace, all of his smiles, the bit with, like, looking at her underwear, he gets away with it because he's so fucking charming. He is so unbelievably charming, but he's a bit of a fiend.
But that's also as well because it's the 70s, and the 70s films, as you've already said, were obsessed with sex. Mm-hmm. Even just, like, the slight implications of it just added, that basically, if this was anything other than a PG-13, he'd be down to fuck, like you say.
Oh yeah.
I'll go back
right out the gate, but
I'll forgive you for I'll forgive you for not knowing their names, considering they don't use their names. They call each other Ma and Pa for like at the beginning.
I should have known Ma and Pa Kent.
So I read right. He's named Clark Kent apparently because Clark is her maiden name, is Martha's maiden name. So when you're angry with your wife, do you call her? Because not when he was angry, but when he wanted to say, "Hey Martha," come on now. He went, "Martha Clark Kent, I've told you." Like, yeah, but that's not her middle name. That's her maiden name. I've never won. Actually, I have.
Is she kept it? I mean, it's a very modern thing. It's kind of like my wife is called Bethan Medina Pritchard. So
yeah, my wife is James Westgate. But
yeah. I don't think they were doing that in Kansas.
No, that's
70s.
what I mean. I don't think, and he didn't.
It would have been the 50s, actually.
Yeah, he Martha Clark Kented it, and it was so weird.
It is a weird one, but I tell you, the weirdest thing I actually think is that Jonathan Kent doesn't get enough credit for dying. Like I know that sounds weird, but when anybody talks about somebody dying in superhero films, they always talk about Uncle Ben and how important he is to Spider-Man. But Jonathan Kent. Yeah, but Jonathan Kent dying is just as important to Superman. And if anything, it's actually done with better actors, whether it be Glenn Ford in this movie or Kevin Costner in Man of Steel. They end up doing so much with so little. Like that sequence when he puts his arm around Clark's shoulder and he's just telling him, it's like, oh, this is what you need to do. This is the person you need to be. And then he has his heart attack. And just that brief moment when he says, oh no, it's fucking heartbreaking. You see in his eyes, like he's not just panicked for him, he's panicked for Clark. He's like, like he needs me here, kind of thing. And as I said, it's the same with Kevin Costner in Man of Steel.
Yeah, but that Kevin
he has
Costner
a few moments. Sorry.
That Kevin Costner death scene in Man of Steel is problematic.
I think it's great.
Don't come towards me. There's a tornado coming. The guy that can literally fight the tornado was not allowed to rescue his dad. Like I thought it was weird.
Yeah, but the whole point was he was willing to sacrifice himself because he was like, the world isn't. Not only is the world not ready to see that, you're not ready to be that person, and he was willing to. I thought that was an amazing sequence.
No, I thought
the sequence worked, but Kevin Costner is a fantastic actor. The way he just kind of waves his hand, and he has a few moments in that movie where you're just like, oh god, again, to bring it back to doing so much with so little.
Yeah,
and I think back at some of the actors who played Uncle Ben, I'm just like, they're kind of they're not as memorable. I'm like,
No,
the guys who played Jonathan Kent,
and
they're great actors, and as I said, their deaths are essential to Superman's storyline. But no one ever talks about it.
The problem you get with the Uncle Ben ones, and the reason why people talk about it more than this, is because you've seen it 9,000 fucking times. You've seen like 3 or 4 Uncle Bens die. You've seen how many Martha Waynes and Thomas Waynes die. Like,
I say what the difference is. It's a Brexit thing. It's basically they've got a good tagline. Everyone remembers Uncle Ben because with great power comes great responsibility, and that's attached to his death. So they basically got that on the side of a bus, and it doesn't matter how great your side of the argument is. Nobody gives a shit about poor John Kent, despite the fact that he has much more emotionally driven deaths. As far as
I know it's not the Man of Steel podcast, but you know when you're talking about John Kent then, and he's shaking his head and he's telling Clark no. Right, all I can think of is best to the best. James Earl Jones going, no,
Tommy, no. Yeah, but I mean, you could add James Earl Jones and add him to any film. Like, it wouldn't make any sense for James Earl Jones to play like John Kent, but I would fucking love it if he did. If he was there going, no, you'd be like, oh yeah, this scene totally fucking works.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, he's just the best though. The other interesting thing about, because when I look at this film, I almost don't think about it as being like a superhero film in the same way that I do about modern superhero movies.
No, it's not a modern superhero film.
It's not at all. No. There's a pacing and a grandeur to this movie which allows it to sit outside the world of contemporary comic book movies. And I actually think to a certain extent the same can be true of set of Batman '89, for instance. So it's like, I don't kind of connect them with modern comic book movies. And the other thing that kind of ties those two together, because you would never get it in modern superhero films, certainly, is that in the first 2 Superman films, he's the third build actor, which is just absolutely insane. You get Brando, Gene Hackman, and then Chris.
You've got to be billed under Brando, because
of course
they're trying to sell Brando. And I'm not sure a big Gene Hackman one. I know Hackman.
Oh, he's huge.
Yeah, by that point he would have been, wouldn't he?
Oh, yeah, massive.
By Doyle and all that stuff. So, yeah. So I do get that. We actually haven't mentioned. We'll mention Hackman in a second, but going back to, it's mad that he's the third build. But the actual, if you look at like Margot Kidder, she's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Oof.
She's 8 in the credits order. Yeah,
so that is rough. Yeah, she's like, Brando isn't the third. Like, you've got to put Brando top because it's Brando. You paid $4 million. It's Brando. It's kind of, and you've got to have Gene Hackman up there because Gene Hackman's ostensibly what Jack Nicholson was to '89 Batman, although not as prevalent. Like, '89 Batman is almost, it's a Joker film more than a Batman film in many respects. This is unabashedly a Superman movie, and for as much as I know we have different opinions on the pacing, especially of the first half, the big issue with it is that the first hour is just you're being introduced to Superman. And you got to remember, in 1978, everybody wouldn't be au fait with Superman and everything that comes with it. Then they spend basically half an hour building up the relationship between Clark Kent / Superman with Lois Lane. Yeah. That leaves basically then 30 minutes for his showdown with Lex Luthor, and that is the bit of the movie which really feels rushed. Like, Gene Hackman rolls in, and don't get me wrong, he makes the most of his screen time. He is chewing the scenery, and what splendid scenery it is. His lair is absolutely fucking fantastic.
I mean, but I do question how the fuck
it does feel rushed.
He managed to put that layer with a swimming pool
and a tanning bed
underneath. Before we go on to Lex Luthor, because we will mention him in a minute, I just wanted to go back because I was mentioning Christopher Reeve. You don't see it because he's wearing that blue and red suit, and he's usually just dressed in a suit when he's a reporter. But fuck me, he got jacked for this, apparently. Like, he put some muscle, because he actually went to David Prowse, who played Darth Vader. And because David Prowse was a bodybuilder, wasn't he? So he got bodybuilding tips from him, and he had a plan worked out. And when he came, because he was expecting, even back then, I think it was like they were going to pad his suit or something. He was like, no, I'll just come in and I'll be... Mate, I've only just recently seen pictures of him with his shirt off during this time, and fuck me, he looks...
It's quite a peculiar one, because obviously the suit isn't like modern superhero suits, where there is, like, don't get me wrong, like, and obviously the obvious comparison is Henry Cavill as the modern version of Superman. He is modern day Hench. Like, he is so big in the same way that, like, Thor is huge, or Chris Evans got massive, where they've got these personal trainers. This was like back in the 70s. So he just, like you said, went off with David Prowse, and basically they just went to the gym. And of course, he doesn't have the benefit of having a suit with that extra layer of padding. And I don't mean fake muscles, but they're thicker suits. This is basically just tights, like lobbed over his body. So there's nothing else on top of that. And I find it odd that he actually looks much leaner as Superman because he's wearing that skin tight suit almost. Yeah. Compared to when he's Clark Kent and he's just wearing normal clothes and he's just standing next to normal people, you're suddenly like, oh, he was a giant of a man. You see, especially in that great moment where he straightens up his. Yeah. Oh, sorry, you carry on.
No. As I say, we're both on the same page. Sorry.
Yeah, I know.
Where you see it, where he takes his glasses off and then he gains an extra 6 inches and his chest puffs out, and you clearly see it.
His performance there is miraculous. Like, one of the things that's easily lost in this film is just how great of an actor he was, Christopher Reeve. And how, like, in terms of physical comedy and what he does to his body, like you said, he hunches over, he becomes a different person. And you almost just take it for granted because it's like, oh, well, that's him playing Clark Kent versus, or this is him as Superman. But that moment when he takes his glasses off, and like you said, he literally looks like he grows 6 inches. And how he, even without the suit, you're saying like, oh, that's Superman. He is transformed from Clark Kent to Superman in the blink of an eye with no change of suit. And you see him there in normal clothes and you're like, this guy is an absolute giant of a man. And I think that is one of the things that has been lacking from more recent interpretations of Superman, is that, like, it's not just, oh, he's big and muscly. Like, he's what, 6'4", 6'5"? He's a big fucking dude kind of thing. And I actually think as great as a Superman, he's equally fantastic as Clark Kent.
He is wicked as Clark Kent. You don't get much of him as Clark Kent. To be fair, you don't get much of him as Superman. Because, like I said, he doesn't actually rock up until an hour into the film, and then it's pretty much. But
it's amazing how immediately he feels right. Like, I love that first sequence with him and Margot Kidder with the famous scene with the helicopter. Yeah, you know, statistically speaking, it's still the safest way to travel and all that jazz. It's like when she's falling, he's like, "I've got you, man. Yes. You've got me. Who's got you?" And I'm just like within a second, like, I totally buy these two. Like, I totally get how these two would fall in love. And it was what, like, I actually thought Brandon Roth was a great Superman, and he was playing the same version of Superman as Christopher Reeve. You know, it was basically supposed to be Superman 3. But Kate Bosworth, they just didn't have that same chemistry. And it was one of the big pitfalls. That film has other issues, but I was just never convinced by her, despite the fact that she's a more traditionally beautiful woman. But she was lacking something, and a big part of what was lacking was that chemistry, I thought, with Brandon Roth.
Of the three that you've mentioned, Lois Lane's, I do think Margot Kidder is the one that makes me feel that she can thrive in this male-orientated world.
100%.
Like, you look at Margot Kidder and you look at the way she acts, and she's going roughshod through everyone. Compare that to, I've only ever seen Superman Returns once, so I can't really comment much on it. But with Kate Bosworth and Amy Adams, maybe it's a sign of the times as well as you move on and things like that. But they don't feel like Lois Lane is. Margot Kidder is portrayed more than you see from the comic book page. Than you see. Yeah. So I totally buy her as Lois Lane, as the woman who is in a male-orientated world, and she is, like I said, she's running roughshod over the guy. So I totally get that. Let's move on quickly. I say quickly. We've mentioned him once or twice, but we haven't really gone into him. Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor.
Yes.
Like, he
is going for it.
He is, like, he knew exactly what the deal was. Somebody told him, right, this is what we only, and he's like, right, they're like, you're the smartest man on the planet. He's like, right, I'll take that. I'm the smartest man on the planet. So my 7 library books that I have in my library, they lead me to everything. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm on the run. The law is trying to find me, but that doesn't stop me from getting an ambulance, a car, a truck with a wide load fucking house on the back.
Dude, we talked a few times about, like, things in this film which were incredibly 70s. That whole sequence with him showing up in different outfits, different trucks and stuff. It's the Dukes of Hazzard, basically. It's so 70s in a brilliant way, but very 70s. It's all the same.
Like, right, when Otis fucked up the
the missiles. Where
he goes, you want to see a long arm, Otis? I'll show you a long arm. And then you got Miss Tessmacher laughing at the fact Otis is getting his ass kicked in the back. But then you go then onto the next scene of them driving that semi-truck, and Otis has a black eye.
Yeah.
I love the continuity of that.
She's another one, Miss Tessmacher. Like, I apologies if I got the name wrong, but she's another. Like, she's obviously a beautiful woman, but she's got that 70s thing about her where I'm like, I don't know if she's 30 or 57.
Yeah.
It's just really hard. She's younger than me. I think she was like 36 at the time. But that wonderful thing about people in the 70s where you're like, oh, they could be anything in a 20 age kind of.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll say is like, and I know they're from the comics. I'm not sure if you need both. Because they both kind of end up playing almost for laughs to a certain extent. I mean, to be honest, I would just get rid of Otis, and that's ostensibly what they did for Superman Returns, didn't they? But yeah, I mean, maybe it's just because I don't like Otis in this film. I'm not sure. But to bring it back to
what's wrong with Otis? I know you're saying
it's a bit too broad. As I said, so much of this film has like a grandeur to it, and it feels special, and it just feels like a big movie. Even like going back, and despite the special effects, like I said, there's a scale to this movie, and whenever I see him, it suddenly feels like I'm watching a TV show. And like you said, with the music and stuff, it just feels a little bit too on the nose for me. That's
Otis has one of my favorite scenes. It might even be on my favorite scene if I think about it. Right, it's when they're following him. The coppers are following him at the beginning, and you've got the Otis music, which again I love.
Yeah, it's charming.
Yeah, but then. When he walks in, he goes, "Hi, Mr. Luthor. I got your paper, Mr. Luthor." And he goes, "You were followed again." And he does the spin thing because he thinks the guys are behind him. And he takes the lamp down.
Just to be clear, I actually think his performance is quite good, and I don't hate the character. I just don't think he belongs in this movie. That's all. It's more of a tonal clash rather than me disliking the performance or the character. Because, like you said, there are funny bits, there are funny lines. I'm just not sure if he fits in my vision of what like the perfect Superman movie. But to bring it back to the whole Luthor thing, because he's got these kind of like comedic elements, and he's got Otis with him all the time, and a lot of it's played for laughs. You can almost think of Lex Luthor as being quite buffoonish, but his plan is proper evil. It is like, you think, oh, well, they're all having a good time and they're all being low-key evil and they have their little, layer underground and stuff. But when he says his plan about, sinking both California and New Jersey into the sea so he can make money from, land ownership. Superman says it. You are talking about killing millions upon millions of innocent people, and he doesn't give a fuck. And the coldest part of it is he's a smart guy. He knows Miss what's her name? Miss Tessmacher. He knows her mum lives in Jersey. Yeah. He knows that. And he sinks Jersey anyway. It's like he's killing her mum out of some weird sense of spite. It's like, on the surface, it almost seems like a jovial performance, but he is dark as fuck in this film.
He is absolutely evil. While we mentioned, one of my last notes, right, while we're mentioning Lex Luthor, did Superman take Lex straight to jail? Do not pass the courts, do not collect a fair trial, just straight to jail.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. But he does say, admittedly, he's like, see that this man receives a fair trial. So he does have that element, that he does uphold the whole idea of, truth, justice in the American way.
He took him straight to jail. And the warden randomly on his balcony going, "You're doing the Lord's work, Superman."
You're doing a great job. No, this is all. And the thing is, right, that seems cheesy, but they're still doing it in superhero movies today. Like, they really laid on thick in like the Spider-Man movies. Like, hey, we're doing it for New York and stuff like that. All right, we get it. You're all fucking angels. He does it in this. But it's like, it's no more egregious than stuff you see in modern superhero films. I don't
No, it's not. It's just...
It's just better in this because it's being delivered by Christopher Reeve Superman, who can somehow pull it off because he's got that goddamn smile. He's like, again, Henry Cavill might be one of the most handsome men who's ever lived. But there's this boyish charm to Christopher Reeve, which to this day makes him the de facto Superman. And I think he always will be. And that's not me criticizing other Supermans. A big part of it is because he came first. But I don't think you can recreate that smile. Oh, no. I know there was the other ones back in the 50s and stuff with George Reeves. Yeah. But realistic, it's the same with Batman. There were earlier Batmans and stuff like that. But realistically, in terms of popular culture, it kind of started with the 60s. And with Superman, despite obviously George Reeves in the 50s, when people think of Superman, they think of 1978. They think of Superman.
You leave Adam West alone. going after Batman.
No, as I said, no, that's my point. When people think of Batman, they think it started with Adam West in the 60s.
Yeah.
But it actually started back in, what, the 40s and the 50s? There was
a 40s Batman, yeah, I believe.
Yeah. So there were two Batmans before Adam West, but everyone just thinks of Adam West. And I think it's the same with Christopher Reeve. And as I said, a big part of that is he's so good at encapsulating every aspect of Superman. And one of the other part of that is, everyone thinks of him as being this Boy Scout, but when he loses his shit, he loses like like when Lois Lane gets buried alive after the fault comes in, sinks into the ground. Like, I remember when I was younger, I always found that quite scary. That's it, because she's being buried alive. It's quite dark, actually. And when he finds her, and he's so sweet with her, and he's worried about kind of putting her head like gingerly on the ground and stuff. But when he does the whole basically no or screams up into the camera, that can be so cheesy, and it's been so poor in so many movies. He does it so well. Like when he gets angry and just kind of screams at the sky, you can feel his rage. Obviously, that's somewhat offset by the fact that he then flies around the earth backwards to turn back time, which we're going to put a question mark next to that one. But he makes the scene work.
I want to ask, right?
Go for it, buddy.
How can he reverse time, but only Earth, not the people around it? If he reversed time to the part before it crashed, but it didn't. It's really weird because he reversed time enough that she comes out of the ground, but she says the petrol station exploded. All this happened, so it hit.
It doesn't make sense.
He makes the dam come back to life. He goes around town, and he goes around the world, and he makes the dam rebuild itself, and he makes the car come out of the ground. But then shouldn't they be reversing?
No, because I think because I was keeping an eye on that, I thought, so he turns back time to before, obviously, the missiles have hit. So the idea, I suppose, is that he comes in, you don't see it, but that he gets rid of both missiles, saves the day. When she stops, she just said, I think she's just run out of petrol. She doesn't mention anything about. But then why would she be out there? No, because she would have heard about the missiles.
Yeah, because she tried to get petrol before it hit. She tried to get petrol. It hit. Then she said the petrol station exploded as she tried to get away, and it swallowed her. And also, Jimmy Olsen would have ended up back in the dam, not in the middle of where he came running.
No, you are right. There's two issues with that. One is the pure physics of it. I know time is kind of it's not a straight line, all these other things. It just, let's make no mistake, him flying so quickly that the world doesn't turn back time. It just kills most of the people on Earth. It just fucks gravity.
Yeah.
It's just basically the end of life as we know it. So yes, from a physics perspective, that doesn't make sense. But then also, if we accept the fact that happened regardless, what happens afterwards doesn't actually make sense either. So there are a lot of problems that I like what they were going for thematically. I mean, and they do lay it on a bit thick, the whole oh, you're not supposed to interfere with the history of human beings. Yeah. And he very literally does that. And of course, it's supposed to represent his connection to humans above his connection to, his dead father and Krypton and stuff. So I like what they were going for thematically. It's just on screen, the more you think about it, the dumber it is.
Yeah.
But it does allow, again, that great moment when she comes out of the car. And of course, he's just watched her die. And the first thing she does is start shouting at him. And the camera cuts to him and he has this little sigh oh, God, Lois. But it's in the sweetest way. So it's almost worth it for that lovely scene afterwards. But yeah, it's dumb as shit.
I couldn't help as well while he was turning back time, humming the song to myself. If I could turn back time, if
all
I
the music in this film.
The way.
That was the one thing this movie scored. I think one of the top 10 scores of all time. That is the one thing it's missing is a bit of Cher. Yeah, throw that in for sure.
Yeah,
but yeah, the special effects at the end are dope. A little bit questionable. We mentioned at the top of the podcast when the Hoover Dam breaks and the town is about to be flooded. It looks a little there's no escaping it. It looks like a set.
Oh yeah,
they can't there's some stuff, especially from the 80s, where they use sets, and it still looks amazing. In this, it looks they can't seem to quite hide the fact that it's miniatures, and that's the big trick with those kind of shots. They used it in obviously Star Wars. They used it in most of the movies in the 80s, is being able to hide the scale. But in this, it does feel small, doesn't it? And that's the problem, which is a bit of a shame because building up towards the end of the film, I think it might have one of the most iconic final shots in movie history. And to have the confidence to have Superman break the fourth wall as the final shot of the film, like when he flies away from Earth, and they've used it, you know, if you were showing a kind of amalgamation of the greatest elements of cinema, or just you know, a montage of cinema, that sequence of Christopher Reeve flying up into space, looking into the camera and smiling would 100% be on it.
Yeah.
But like, I just totally forgot that. He looked at the camera. He looks at the camera and he smiles at you. I was like, that's a ballsy move. But as I said, for all the faults are in this film, I don't think there is a movie that's as bookended as well as this. So, you know, like I said, I think the opening 10 minutes, especially the credit sequence, which I think is one of the best, it stands up to just about anything. And that final shot is near perfect, with the music coming back in and him flying into space. And like you said, the rough shots of him flying are all in the day. When he's flying in space, still looks great.
When he's chasing that rocket, when he's chasing the army rocket to Hackensack, New Jersey, it's a bit...
Yeah, you have to kind of go with it. But as I said, the opening and the ending in particular, they still hold up. So much of it is kind of intertwined with the score. So it's bookended almost perfectly. There's great stuff throughout, but there are problems. And I'm so glad we agree on most of it is kind of like a timing thing. It's like, oh, well, it's the 70s and you have to get over the visuals. I'm going to go on record. I hate the sequence with the voiceover and him and Lois flying. I just don't like it.
No, not at all. No.
I'm glad we're on the same page. It does work. Anything else?
I was going to say, should we go loves and hates?
Well, no, favorite scene first.
Oh, favorite scene.
So it's not that. It's not. Let's be clear. Mine is the start. So it's the prelude, the opening credits, which still look amazing, even without the music, and the fact that it leads right into that opening shot of Krypton with the Planet Krypton score, that bum, 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 bum. Oh, it gets me every time. So yeah, I'd say the first 10 minutes of this, I'm going to have it all as a scene, and I'm just going to use that.
You told me I wasn't allowed to do that before. But
it's not really a scene, it's like the opening credits, isn't it? And like the first bit's a prelude, then it's the credits, then it's the opening scene. So yes, am I cheating? Absolutely. Am I absolutely head over heels in love with the first 8 minutes of this film? Yes, I am.
I can't get away from the introduction of Otis.
Of all the things.
Yeah, honestly, it's so random. You were followed again, and it was just like
it is weird because you are saying these things. I like him, but
it's. I think Dave, who sometimes does the podcast with us, he's told you this before. We live quite close to him, and I live by his mother. So every now and then he'll be picking his mother up, and he'll be driving. I'll be walking, or I'll be coming home or something, and he'll call me, and he'll just shout my name. And my first thing to do is not to look behind me or anything. I look up.
What the fuck?
So he'll go, Rob, and I'll go, God? That's my first thing to do is...
I thought maybe you'd been previously teabagged or something and you were just looking out for a crotch-based attack. I don't know.
So I'd laugh my ass off. He said to Otis, you were followed again.
And he just spins round.
The guy is right behind him.
Listen, the performance is good. It's good physical comedy. It's funny. The music, like I said, all good in of itself. I'm just not sure if it belongs in the movie. And I'm defending that because that's going to pop up in my hates, of course. In terms of loves, number one, with the bullet, Christopher Reeve. Number two, the chemistry between Reeve and Margot Kidder, which I think is so important because they don't actually get given a huge amount of time. So it needs to work straight away. And it absolutely does. And number three, unsurprisingly, is the score. 2 weeks after I decided to remove the score section from this podcast, I run into one of the greatest scores of all time and spend half the podcast talking about it anyway. But yeah, really, John Williams' score is one of the best, I think.
I'm going to double down on that and say the music because...
Just lacking Cher, of course. But
of course, because that score is fantastic. Obviously, Superman's score is amazing. The Krypton theme is absolutely that's fucking wicked. Otis's theme is fantastic. Have to be my new ringtone. So for me, number one is the music within it. It's absolutely great. Christopher Reeves, as you say, he embodies, especially that one scene. And do you know what? I might have to change my answer of my favorite scene to where he, you see him go from Clark Kent to Superman.
I think you should because that scene is so good.
It's
so good.
A metamorphosis or something. Just how he just grows and it looks fantastic. So
it's weird. You don't need to make that mental transition. As soon as he takes his glasses off and he straightens up, and it's not just his posture, it's his face
and his voice.
His face. his voice, everything. And straight away, you're just looking at Superman wearing everyday clothes. You're not looking like, you usually have that mental transition. It's like, oh, well, Clark Kent wears a suit and Superman wears a super suit, whatever. But it's all to do with the performance. And like I said, the moment he straightens up and his face changes, his demeanor changes, and as you said, his voice changes, you're like, that is Superman in front of me. And I think that moment, more than anything else, perfectly encapsulates why Christopher Reeve will arguably forever be the de facto Superman.
Yeah. And my third one is 80% of the flying scenes. 80% of the flying scenes look great. 80% of Superman with his test of strength, things like that. I think the effects that they did for that, I think, spot on. Then you get the running scene and the flying during the day, and it becomes a bit of its time, should we say. So
yes, let's be kind and say of its time.
Yeah, so that's for me on the loves.
Fair enough. In terms of hates, and to bring it right back to your point, number one is Clark running. It's kind of like, it's so bad that it's almost charming and funny, but make no mistake, it's bad. It was bad, and I think it was bad back in 78, because I mentioned to my dad yesterday, I was like, oh, I watched Superman the movie for the first time in donkey's years. And he's like, oh, I haven't watched that for so long. He goes, oh, that running scene's the worst though. And I was like, yeah, it really is. So it was bad. It's not bad by today's stats. I think it was just bad. Full stop. Number two, Otis and Jimmy. I don't think either of them, like I said, are bad per se. I just wouldn't have them in this film for tonal reasons. Sorry, can't speak. And number three is Turning Back Time or Flying with Lois. Pick your poison. No. I'm going to stick with it. It's Flying with Lois, number three, for sure. I can get over as I said, the Turning Back Time, visually, it looks cool. And then you have the moment with Lois and Superman afterwards, which is so charming. But the Flying with Lois, you're taking two characters who I love for most of the film and just put them in this really cheesy sequence, which I just don't think works. I think it would probably work. I think it would have looked good on the page, but they just went too far with the fairy tale shit.
Number one for me is 20% of the flying scenes.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right? The running.
That makes sense.
I'm not into the, like you say, the can you read my mind fairy tale scene. It's so weird.
The voiceover stuff is so bad. It's just a poor choice.
I didn't like the turn back time scene. And I'm going to sneak a fourth in. Jimmy Olsen. I thought he was pointless.
He's one of those, I think he's just, you need to have Jimmy Olsen in it. And it's like, it's strange because at the end, you mentioned earlier the scene when he's in the pool and his test marker kind of comes out and she goes, oh, you have to promise me you'll save my mum first. And he says, oh, I've got to save Lois and Jimmy. Like he's got this connection to Jimmy. I'm just like, really, Jimmy? Do you really give a shit? I mean, I know he cares about everyone because he's Superman, but I thought it would have just been, oh, I've got to save Lois. Yeah. But it's kind of trying to build up a connection, which we don't really see on screen, but it's been there through the comic book. So yeah, also, he's just not given the time.
In 1978, is $40 a week a lot of money back then?
I don't know. I'm all confused about money. I don't know what was like worth a lot last week, let alone in 1978. So God knows. But like I said, the most confusing thing in terms of finances remains Lois Lane's apartment, which is outrageous, absolutely outrageous.
Yep.
That everything. So we're on to alternative titles. Are there any alternative titles? I assume there'll be some. I can't imagine it's called Superman the Movie everywhere.
Move on, dude. Move on to the next one.
Oh, so it is called Superman the Movie everywhere.
It's either Superman or Superman the Movie.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought in some places it might just be called Superman rather than Superman
the best one I can give you is Mexico. Superman the Film.
Why does that sound so stupid? Yeah. It's the same thing, but it sounds dumb as fuck. Yeah. Superman the Film. Okay, fair enough.
That's the best one I can give you. Oh,
that's actually pretty good.
I got one for you. Vietnam. Overman.
What? Overman?
Overman.
Okay, that's got to be a translation, like Superman.
I don't know what he's over, but man, that guy is over.
He is over it. I got to be honest, Superman the Film is one of my favorites ever.
It's a wrestler, isn't it? They say when you're a face and when the crowd loves you, you're over. So why didn't you have a wrestler called Overman?
Overman, yeah, that would work. It just doesn't work for this, sadly.
No.
Do you have any facts for it? I'm sure there are at least a few.
Yeah. We got a few. According to Sir Roger Moore's autobiography, he witnessed Christopher Reeve walking through the canteen at Pinewood Studios in full Superman costume, oblivious to the swooning female admirers he left in his wake. When he did the same thing dressed as Clark Kent, no one paid any attention. Very interestingly, something similar happened with Harold Lloyd. When he wasn't filming movies, removed his iconic round glasses, nobody paid attention to him. At that point, nobody recognized him as the famous actor he was. Lloyd was the inspiration for Superman's alter ego Clark Kent, especially in the detail of the glasses to hide himself of the public eye in his civilian identity.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. There's something like that suit shouldn't work with it being like so skinny, but he just looks fantastic in it.
To achieve the shot of young Clark Kent kicking a football into orbit, an air cannon was placed underground and the football fired from it.
Oh, is that I was literally thinking out because that scene, like as bad as like the running next to the train sequence, when he kicks that football, it looks fantastic. It looks so real.
Yeah. On his first day on set, Marlon Brando suggested to Richard Donner that the cameras roll during rehearsal. Brando reportedly said, "Who knows, we might get lucky." According to Donner, that very first take was the one that was used in the finished film. Brando was notoriously lazy and was constantly pulling little stunts like this to lessen his workload. Christopher Reeve even complained about it in an interview, saying Brando was phoning it in and it shows. And you've turned around and said Brando was fucking killing it.
Well, that's the thing, though. He's not. He probably was phoning in terms of like in terms of his performance. It's not his most memorable. It's not like The Godfather or something like that. But at the same time, I think part of it is just because it's Brando and he's got that voice that it just works regardless. Like you think he probably could give a great performance in his sleep. That's how good he was.
Joe, I only have 3 Brandos, actually maybe a couple more. Obviously, you've got the Water Rat or Waterfront or whatever it was called.
On the Waterfront.
Yeah. For some reason, then I have in my head Godfather and The Island of Dr. Moreau.
Yeah. I always remember The Island of terrible movie. And there was a movie he did with, I think it was Edward Norton, one of his last films. I think it was called The Score. He's only in a brief.
With Robert
he was in that. He was in that Michael Jackson video with Chris Tucker as well. No. Was he supposed to be? I think he was supposed to be in it. That was it. He wanted Marlon Brando, but couldn't get him or something like that. So I think I've just got The Score in my head because he's sitting at a bar, unsurprisingly sitting down because he was big by the time he did The Score. So a bit of a shame, but in his pomp, something else for sure.
It was Marlon Brando's idea to have Jor-El wear the same S symbol on his clothes that Kal-El would later wear as Superman.
That's unbelievably impactful because instead of it standing for Superman, it's for their house. So it's just, they actually, obviously, they make a big thing of it in Man of Steel where they're trying to ground it. It's like, the S isn't for Superman. It just happens to look like an S. And you can actually bring it right back to this film. And it's just a happy accident that, Marlon Brando was ahead of the game.
Christopher Reeve proved to be an even greater asset than anticipated after being cast. Reeve flew gliders as a hobby and used his experience as a pilot to make Superman's flying feel more believable. His performance as both Superman and Clark Kent was roundly praised in making a superhero's secret identity seem surprisingly convincing. Also, Reeve provided his voice for the air traffic controller, giving the arriving helicopter pilot the current flying conditions.
Oh, I didn't know that. But that is the difference. I'd say a massive difference between his performance and more modern iterations. It's just like, it's basically just Superman with glasses on. Yeah. Whereas in this, we've already mentioned that famous sequence, but he literally looks like a different person. Obviously you're still stretching credibility, but you can almost buy into it that he would be like a completely different person.
Yeah. The height of Brando's laziness, right? Brando refused to memorize most of his lines in advance. In the scene where he puts infant Kal-El into the escape pod, he was actually reading his lines from the diaper of the baby. He told Richard Donner that the only way to keep his performance fresh and not over-rehearsed was to record the first time he read the lines.
Brilliant. Just A+ shithousery to just not have to do any more work than you have to. It's unreal. It's like high school shit, isn't it? It's unbelievable.
They take the baby. I mean, that is a cheat sheet all over, isn't it? They take the baby out of the crib and they go, "Fuck me, why is he going writing on him?"
Yeah, it's go like, this half the script. This is ridiculous. Yeah. Well, as I said, got to appreciate the shithousery of the man.
The end title sequence is more than 7 minutes long, a record at the time of the film's release in 1978. Fucking hell, if that's a record, come to any film these days.
Well, yeah, like they just, special effects just weren't so much of a thing. I mean, obviously, Star Wars had just been the year before, but it was still in its infancy in many respects. But as I said, that is the thing. It doesn't surprise me when you look back at this film, because as much as it may have aged, what it does still feel is big. Yeah, it feels like a big movie in so many respects. Like the scene with younger Clark and his mother, Martha, like it feels like a throwback to earlier cinema, and they're looking back over the plains of Kansas. It feels like something from Gone with the Wind. Yeah, it doesn't feel out of place at all in the movie.
Right, I'll give you two more.
Cool.
Yeah, okay, sorry. A man riding a motorcycle dragging a bag of dirt was used to make the effect of Clark running down the dirt road after jumping in front of the train.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I like that practical effect thing.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And lastly, because this is just funny, Gene Hackman flatly refused to shave his head or wear a bald cap to play Lex Luthor. To get around this issue, Hackman's own natural hair was styled differently from scene to scene to give the appearance of him having changed hairpieces. Numerous hairpieces are visible in his underground complex. Hackman relented and wore a skull cap in one scene when he is taken to prison by Superman. It is visible when he angrily rips off his hairpiece to address the prison's warden, who questions who he is. Hackman was also forced to shave off his mustache, which he was keen on keeping at the time.
Oh yeah, well, when I think of Gene Hackman, I do think of his mustache. But yeah, I didn't realize that because, as you were saying, I was like, well, what about the scene at the jail at the end when he takes but obviously, yeah, the skull cap.
I love it. So they give him a skull. They give him a skull cap and then a wig on top of his hair for that scene.
Well, it just speaks to, again, 70s cinema and what it was like to be a movie star. That you could, if you were big enough, you could just tell people to basically go fuck themselves. Like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it. If you want me to be in your movie, I'm not doing it. So you have to work around it, and that's it.
I hope I don't fuck his name. Was it Cesar Romero who played the Joker?
Oh yeah. Cesar Romero
just would not shave his mustache off, so they just painted white makeup on it, and it's clearly visible.
Yeah, just not giving a fuck. Just like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm the star. You need me. That's the problem with this change to this franchise business. Is everyone just does what they said because it's the franchise that sells, not the stars. I prefer the star-based system. You get more interesting films, and you get these wild characters who just have to go fuck themselves. And now everything's so fucking censored. Nobody wants to say anything because they're worried it'll come out on social media, and people will think they're being shithouses. I like my movie stars to be shithouses occasionally. I miss the shithouses.
The shithousery.
Yeah, I do. In terms of legacy, I mentioned it's not officially the first superhero, but it's very much the first modern superhero in many respects. It's weird that it was such a big success, but it didn't lead to other superhero movies, just sequels of wildly different quality. Like, there was basically this. There was Superman 2, 3, and 4, and then there was Batman in 89. Like, Batman 89, obviously it wasn't successful, but it led to other superhero films. We mentioned on the Batman 89 podcast, they all took the wrong lessons and everyone went for that 50s vibe. And you end up with movies like The Phantom and The Shadow, and none of them worked. And then the superheroes disappeared again until basically Blade and X-Men. But with this massive hit, 4 Superman films, no other superhero films. I just thought that was bizarre.
I wonder as well if at the time they were able to do the fly-in, but if you look at the big Superman back then, I mean, you did have the 70s Spider-Man. That was, I mean, he didn't actually get to swing from buildings, did he? The 70s Spider-Man, he just threw a net on people.
Yeah, but it was all nonsense,
it's those kind of things.
Budget.
But that's what I mean. So you could have him fly in, but a lot of the other ones, probably their power sets wouldn't work on screen back then. I'm guessing.
But the problem is nobody even tried. Like, nobody even thought, well, let's do a Batman. Maybe like the Adam West thing, because it might have been in syndication, might have been the issue. But you think, with this being such a success, and like you said, there were other films, but they were all like no budget nonsense. Whereas this was like, all right, we're going all in on this. We're getting the big actors, we're getting the big effects, and it worked. And I don't know, maybe it was like by the time Superman 2 came out, and that was still a bit of a big hit because of the way it went with Superman 3, and obviously things went so badly with Superman 4. Maybe everyone was just like, oh, it's done before. It was like a one-off more than anything else, rather than thinking it could be its own genre, which we take for granted nowadays. But speaking of which, it is interesting that Superman has one of the most successful sequels of all time in terms of, perceived quality with Superman 2, and one of the worst with Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. So, as I said, the quality is all over the place.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you mentioned Superman 2, you mentioned Superman 4. Not many people mention Superman 3.
The Richard Pryor one and the supercomputer. And it's weird because that's got it's not a great film, but it has a great sequence where Superman fights evil Superman. And there's another one where he basically gets buried. I remember when I was younger, I found it quite freaky when he gets stuck in the car compactor by evil Superman. But then, of course, he breaks out the side, throws the tires over him and stuff. But Christopher Reeve is brilliant as evil Superman. Basically plays him like a drunk almost. There's good stuff, but it's not a good film. And
it's not.
I think it's because I think people would feel more positively about Superman 3 as this kind of weirdo comedy take on the character if Superman 4 had been good, for instance. But instead, everyone just thinks, oh, well, things just went off the rail after Superman 2. So much so that Superman Returns was just basically Superman 3 in disguise.
Yeah.
It's it's one of those sequels where we're just going to pretend 3 and 4 didn't happen. They didn't make a big deal of it, but he is playing Christopher Reeve's version of Superman, and it's an odd film because it feels like everybody talks about it like it was this big flop and everybody hates it. When it came out, the reviews were quite good. It did okay business, and the good stuff in that film is fantastic, and I think Brandon Roth is chief amongst those. It's just not everything works. I think it painted itself into a corner in the latter half. I would make the argument that Superman is still the most iconic superhero of all time. He very much, to me, feels like the Mickey Mouse of superheroes. Like, like when you get told Winnie the Pooh is actually more popular now and makes more money, that might be true. Like Iron Man or Batman might be the Winnie the Pooh of superheroes, but Mickey Mouse will always be the most iconic, and I still think of Superman as being the most iconic.
I mean, I agree with that from a point of view from everybody else, but I've never really liked Superman. Reading the comics, but my comic taste anyway. They've always been the darker offshoot people that Moon Knight and
I was going to say, I don't think your love of Moon Knight speaks for the general populace.
But that's what I mean. Yeah, but when you look at like Superman, he always seemed to have a power to get him out of it. He always found a new power in
well, it's a different problem. The threat is often, and it's not always the case, but often it's not to him. And it was certainly the case with this movie, which, I think is actually a really good blueprint. The threat isn't to Superman. The threat is to the world and the people he loves. And does he have, despite all this power, can he still deal with those issues? So that I always thought that was the more interesting aspect of Superman. But I know what you mean. Like, he can feel like overpowered, and it's like, well, how do you write the story around? Like, how can Batman and Superman be on screen when Batman is, Tansy is just a dude kind of thing?
Because I think we said it before for Superman. Like the entire planet of Krypton must now just be kryptonite, because everybody always seems to find kryptonite.
Well, that's one of the weird things about this film, and I don't want to go too much back into the film, but I couldn't figure out how Lex Luthor was so well informed about kryptonite. Like, how does he know that it makes Superman ill and stuff? Like, he just seems to open a book, and he just seems to know everything.
He even called it kryptonite. Like, it's funny because he goes, and I appreciate it's logical to deduce that if it blew up, like how he knew it blew up, I don't know, but he says it's logical to deduce if it blew up, it followed the same path that Superman took.
Well,
so
would it be?
But I get that. But then for him to go, oh, that's all right, but I bet you it kills him. Why? Why would it do that?
He's made a massive logic jump, which is correct, but I just don't understand why. Yeah. The shadow of this movie cast remains very, very large, but in particular, it's Reeve's performance, which looms especially large over all subsequent Superman movies, i.e. Man of Steel, blah, 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 a movie that has since, I think, been reappraised, but one that couldn't initially escape the expectations of the character established in the original movies. And it'll be interesting to see how Dave Corenswet, is that how you pronounce his name? In the new
Corenswet, is it?
Corenswet, I'm not sure. Does with the comparisons with Superman's, because with Superman Legacy coming out, I think he's going to run into the same issues. People are going to compare him, and a lot of the criticism towards Henry Cavill at the start was that he did stuff which obviously Christopher Reeve's character wouldn't. They wouldn't accept the fact that it was in a different world, in a different movie, but it was just like, that was like this barrier, this hurdle to get over. It'll be interesting to see if he runs into the same issues. It might not be, I know we're not doing a score section, but I would argue, again, as I mentioned earlier, that this is a top 10 score. And one of the more interesting aspects of, and this is more a Superman legacy point than just Superman the movie, is the fact that so much of it belongs on the small screen. So there's Lois and Clark, that like the first superhero TV show, but in reality, the first was actually The Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves in 1952, that they obviously turned into the movie with Ben Affleck. What was that? Hollywoodland, wasn't it?
Hollywoodland.
Then there was Smallville, which got the jump on like the CW by like a decade. Now there's Superman and Lois, which appears to have gone from strength to strength. So it's like, as much as we think of Superman as being a cinematic character, he's probably played a bigger role on TV than just about any other superhero, I think.
It's funny, isn't it? Because that is true. Superman has been on TV forever. Like, Superman's home seems to be more TV than film. Whereas when you
but then I oddly still think of him as being the most cinematic of superheroes. It's quite bizarre.
When you have these superhero shows that are linked, like you have Superman, like Smallville brought in all its characters. You had Arrow that brought in all DC characters as well, but nobody was ever allowed to mention Batman or Bruce Wayne on TV. Because there's film rights to it. So Gotham City gets mentioned a lot, but nothing to do with Batman or Bruce Wayne. They could never mention it. So it's funny, isn't it? Whereas you said you see Superman as being cinematic, but his home really is TV.
It has been for the longest time. It's quite bizarre.
Can I mention as
And
well?
that's not to... Oh, sorry, Karen.
Can I mention, because you mentioned Superman Legacy, and I just wanted to say it. I don't care if it's shit. I don't care what happens. I'm just really glad Nathan Fillion is playing Guy Gardner.
Oh yeah, that's a great show. I mean, I have every like I said, I loved Man of Steel, and I like the Snyderverse.
Yeah.
But listen, they made a mess of it. Like, they had a chance. Man of Steel was a great start, and they were going to do something different to Marvel, and they panicked, and it became this mess of a thing. And it had to die. It just had to, because they just got it all wrong. So I'm all in. I'm interested to see what James Gunn does with this. Like, you have to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's got a fantastic track record in superheroes. Guardians of the Galaxy, like, I know it didn't do as big business, but the Suicide Squad film was fantastic. Peacemaker is without question the best superhero TV show I've ever seen. It's that fucking good. So I'm going to give him every benefit. But like I said, there's the movies, there's the TV shows, but that's not to mention the myriad of animated shows, the merchandise, and yes, of course, the comics, including the biggest selling comic book of all time, The Death of Superman, which obviously kind of was played to a certain extent out in Batman versus Superman. In terms of making a change for this film, if you're going to make one change for this film, I'm tempted to say bring in Spielberg, who was rumored to direct this film before Donner got the job, but they wanted to see how he did with that quote-unquote fish movie first. So maybe they should have gone with it, because obviously Jaws turned into one of the biggest hits of all time. But if I'm being honest, it's updating the practical effects. That's my big issue with the film. That, and maybe get rid of Lois and Superman flying around a bit. But yes, if I'm going to pick one, which that's the whole point of this, I would improve some of the physical effects.
I would add, because the whole point of Lex Luthor is trying to destroy Superman, but he can never do it on his own. Mm-hmm. So he brings in villains or things like that. And I say now I would bring somebody that could fight Superman to a point. They tried that with Superman 4 Nuclear Man, and it didn't.
But they did it well in Superman 2. They were setting it up for Superman 2. So you kind of got your cake and ate it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know. It felt that Lex Luthor, especially played in this one, played for laughs, played the way he was, didn't feel like much of a threat towards Superman. So
no, it's the problem you get with these films. You either make it, basically, do you make it a villain movie, or do you make it a superhero film? When I'm talking about the first one, and obviously with Batman, they had enough confidence. Everyone knew the Batman story, that they made it about the Joker. But it came at the cost of Batman. It's not a Batman movie. And if you go back and watch Batman Begins, the bad guy stuff is almost pushed to the side. It's there, but it's very much a Batman movie above all else. And that's what you get with this film. It does come at the cost of Lex Luthor and the villainy and everything else. Above all else, this really is, as the title suggests, Superman the film, as they call it in Mexico. Yeah. It's not Luthor. It's not a fight with anyone. 90% of this film is just telling you the story of Superman.
Yeah.
In terms of video games, so there's loads of Superman video games, but the ones that stick in my mind are obviously Superman 64, which is widely considered to be one of the worst video games of all time, and the lesser known but somewhat underrated Superman Returns on the 360, which, while flawed, had some great flying, and smartly, as we mentioned a moment ago, had Superman basically as being invulnerable, but with the health bar being Metropolis. So they already knew, it's like, well, we can't have Superman getting beat up because he's almost invincible. So it literally had a health bar, and it was the city. So you had to fly around a relatively open world, saving Metropolis from exploding. So it became like an almost kind of destruction management game.
Yeah.
Not amazing, but I just thought it was a really good idea. Amazingly, though, there isn't really a genuinely good Superman game, which is bonkers given his powers. There just isn't one. There's like the Injustice games, there's DC Lego games, which are decent, but they're not really Superman games, are they? So it's like...
No, you can't really... all the Superman games are shit. They can't control it. They can't work out his power set correctly. And the flying mechanics on those games and everything just don't seem to work.
They just never given it a proper go. And I was really thinking hard about, like, who would I want to make a modern-day Superman game? And against all odds, I would go with the Anthem team at BioWare. And I know that video game isn't exactly beloved, but the one thing it did was it had absolutely amazing flight. And if you're doing a Superman game, you've got to get the mechanics right first. And that was what was lacking in Superman Returns, for instance. They had a good idea, but the mechanics weren't great. And Anthem is the opposite issue in so much that the idea and the world building wasn't fantastic, but the mechanics were brilliant. So I'd get those guys to come in, do the flight, make a Superman game, make it polished, AAA. But the fact that nobody's actually even attempted to make a AAA Superman game, I find bewildering, absolutely bewildering.
I went a completely different route, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like completely different, because I agree that nobody can seem to make a good Superman game. So I'm on the understanding of, well, why even try again? So
just no Superman game, no Superman.
No, I would actually do it as some sort of Jimmy Olsen game, where you're pulling faces, but it's taking the best shots of the destruction or what Superman's fighting. So it's trying to. So you Jimmy Olsen.
That's actually pretty fucking good. Like Beyond Good and Evil.
Yeah, where you're following the carnage, you're following this, and then
fucking so clever. That's so much better than mine.
You don't have to then have the flying mechanics because it's happening there and stuff, and you're the, and it's like, are you getting the best shots? Are you, and then you're able then maybe as you're traveling along, you're able to figure out the big bad of whatever's going on, and you inform Superman kind of thing. So I would have done it from randomly through the lens, no pun intended, of Jimmy Olsen.
I think that's much better. I think that's a really clever idea. I love the idea of like you traveling to locations, trying to get the drop on Superman, getting those shots. The guy, the whole thing is like, how do you get the shots of a guy who's faster than a speeding bullet or whatever the hell it is? It's like, yeah. So you win this week, 100%. So in terms of scores and recommendations, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first, and it seems to be the fourth week in a row that it's a 3. I mean. I think I said it last week as well. For the parts that are good, they're great. For the parts that are bad, they're bad. But again, it's a 70s film. But it's a really good film. It's 3. It's enjoyable. And to be fair, I would. If somebody was just getting into into comic book films, I think Superman is a film that you need to watch, if only to see the progression of films. Yeah. Like you see, right, this is what they did in the 70s. Now watch Superman and then see what happened after.
Almost on an educational level.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, for me, it's a weird one because I think it might be my first ever 4-star with a potential no. I mean, as great as it is, there are quite a few barriers for modern audiences. But saying that, I mean, despite its age, it's still the quality that ultimately shines through, whether it's the score, the tone, Brando's gravitas, Hackman's scenery chewing, Reeves and Kid are absolutely dripping with chemistry. Like Superman the movie remains a great watch, I think. Although I do kind of wish I hadn't said dripping with chemistry now. I definitely should have left out my marriage vows. Yeah. Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife in dripping chemistry or dry biology? I don't know how that would work, but it sounds gross. But I've said at the start there, first ever 4-star with a potential no. I've kind of changed my own mind. I'm going to go with 4 stars and yes, but it does have those caveats. You have to go with it because there are, like we've mentioned it a bunch of times, but there are those barriers. This is a very 70s movie. But I think, bizarrely, the fact that it's 70s helps it. We did Deep Rising last week, which isn't as good as this. But we said one of the barriers are the special effects, but the problem with that film is that most of it still feels very modern. So the special effects feel more galling, for lack of a better term, where in this, before you even see any special effects, it's just 70s. People are wearing 70s clothes. It's shot like a 70s film. Metropolis looks like a 70s city. So when you see the 70s special effects, you're like, well, yeah, it's a 70s film. And you're more accepting of it in a way that you aren't for, say, a 90s film, which is just starting to look a little bit shit.
No more 70s than that guy sees Superman change. He goes, woo-wee, that's a bad outfit.
Oh, yeah, like the pimp dude.
Yeah.
God damn, Superman, you looking fly as hell. Oh, that guy was fucking awesome.
And then because it's the 70s, is Ho tried to say it as well? Anyway, shut up, bitch.
Yeah, I mean, did you see shit? I mean, we probably
no.
I don't think he is a pimp at all. I think he might just be a black guy. So we do apologize for that, but never mind. So I guess that leaves us with what we're doing next week. It's your choice, sir.
Yeah. So I was trying to figure out what could follow Superman. You know, and I was going, oh, we're going to do
big boots to fill, that's for sure.
big boost. Yeah, definitely. What's going to follow Superman? And you know what? The only thing I could think of that could follow Superman?
What's that?
Gleaming the Cube.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. If I think in quite a lot of cinemas, when they do double bills, they do Superman the movie and Christian Slater's
Gleaming
90s skateboarding movie, Gleaming the Cube.
Yeah.
It is 90s, right? It's got to be on the border. Like 91?
I'm sure.
Oh, it's 80s?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought maybe it was anywhere between 89 and 91, I thought. But yeah, you're probably right. It probably is.
I'll tell you now. Just keep talking.
Well, yeah, that is... keep talking, of course. I mean, that is an interesting...
89.
Oh, it is 89, so it's right on the cusp. But yeah, obvious bedfellow. So a bit of a shifting tone. But I think it's going to be interesting. Listen, dude, I'm the same as you. I grew up watching Gleaming the Cube. Yeah. And I liked it enough that we watched it multiple times. But I have not seen this film since probably like 1995.
Yeah, I'm going 90 since I've seen it as well. And I'm going to say I'm not too sure it'll hold up, but it's still worth going back and watching.
Oh, I think that's the whole point of this podcast. Like you said, like I got it wrong. I lost track of what we were trying to do. It was movies that we enjoyed when we were younger. Do they hold up? And I was the same as you. When I was growing up, I totally enjoyed Gleaming the Cube. I have quite a few concerns that it won't hold up in 2023, but hey, let's find out together, eh?
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
I'll just do the usual that we've been saying the last couple of weeks. If you haven't already, ask a friend, nick your wife's phone, get her to do it as well. Vote for us on the British Podcast Listeners' Choice Awards. We're putting the links on our social medias, but you can just go to British Podcast Awards and vote and find Listeners' Choice in there and just search for us. That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Cool. Well, if that's everything, okay. I've been Liam, he's been Rob, and you've been listening to the Hey Guys podcast. See you next week. Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.
Oh, and before we forget, here is Rob with all the finer details. Got to get through those, dude.
Yeah, so basically you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. We're also on email at heyyouguys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any recommendations, any corrections or omissions we may have missed from any of the films that we've covered. Just get them in. And also, if you could, please leave us some 5-star reviews. That would really help us. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing. Thanks for that, mate.
Cheers, Darry.
Yeah. And thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week.
Cheers. Bye.